Perfect. Hey, Christina. Well, welcome everyone to our Committee on Leveraging Resources. We do have a quorum to get started. And for today's agenda, I'm going to touch base on just next steps with the committee chair position. And then we'll spend most of our time continuing to talk about our planning guide concept that we've called the pre-fire playbook, talking about it as the Forest Resilience Guide. And I'm really grateful to welcome Allison Lurch from DNR. She's going to offer some feedback from her perspective and from her background on the planning guide as we try to round out some of the feedback that we've collected over the last month from both more discussion in this committee, discussion at the Forest Health Council, and some additional offline conversations that I think many of us have probably had on this document. And I also want to welcome Commissioner Church. Thank you so much for joining us on this committee, and I'm excited to have you on the full council, and feel free to jump in with any questions as we dive in today. And then as we wrap up and look to July, we can pick back up some of our conversations on the All Lands treatment and database. And we'll have Amanda West Fordham come from the Colorado State Forest Service to talk about a lot of really great progress that sounds like is happening in that direction. So that's setting the stage for today. And we do have 2 meeting minutes that we need to accept, those from April and from May. So unless there's any discussion on those, I think we can probably take those as one action item. And I'll pause to entertain a motion from the group to move those forward.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Perfect. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you for that. So moving into just the discussion on the committee chair, I think it was really great to see a lot of you in person at the Forest Health Council meeting that we had in Larimer County. And then I've seen a few of you since at other conferences, but I am set to go on maternity leave at the end of August with my second baby. So wanted to just touch base with this group about a good time to transition out of this committee chair position, and also thinking about just being mindful of my workload when I return and come back. So I am happy to keep these meetings on my calendar and help facilitate through our July meeting, but wanted to tee up having a conversation about moving into a new chair position at our next meeting in July. So I don't think we need to belabor this point too much during today's agenda, but just wanted to kind of tee that up for the group and say that I'll, step down as chair, given that I will be gone for a few months, but really happy to jump back into the committee and of course the full council when I get back from maternity leave. So unless there's any questions or folks want to discuss that anymore, Courtney, I know Angela is going to jump back on, but I think the process is that next time we can take any nominations for the chair position and vote. Is there a more formal way that we need to handle that?
I don't think there's anything in the bylaws about how to elect a chair. So that process you outlined sounds right.
Okay. Well, great.
Yeah, and hey, Amy, this is Angela on the phone.
Oh, hey.
Computer's having some major problems, but we'll take a look at the bylaws again and just shoot you an email to clarify. But yeah, I think if folks can give it some thought and come prepared to announce their interest in serving as chair at the next meeting, then we can vote from there.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Angela. I'm happy to pass any more instructions or detail on to the group ahead of that meeting as well. Any other questions there?
No questions, but just congratulations on your baby and really excited for you. And you've done a really great job, Amy. So just want to say thank you and recognize all the time and effort that you put in, and you're really organized and have moved this group forward. So just want to acknowledge that and thank you.
Thanks, Christina. I appreciate that. And hopefully, unless things go awry, I will still be there next month, which will be great. So I'm excited to stick around for a bit. But I think we can turn now to just the topic of focus for the last few months on the pre-fire playbook outline. And I tried to sort of encapsulate on our agenda some of the feedback to date and discussions. But maybe to kick us off, Allison, I'm happy to turn it over to you. We have Allison Lurch, who's the Wildfire Mitigation Program Administrator with the Department of Natural Resources, has a great background and a lot of insight to offer on this endeavor that we've been talking about. So I really appreciate Allison's willingness to join today and offer some of her feedback. Will help us really dive into some areas that we might want to further flesh out until we pick this back up again with the full Forest Health Council at the July 27th meeting, when we set priorities for what will be in the 2023 annual report. So Allison, happy to turn it over to you just to get us going with this discussion.
So much. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just really do appreciate being here today. Briefly about me and why I wanted to jump in on this discussion. So I am in partnership with Courtney and Angela as we run the statewide Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program. And but before coming to Colorado, I've worked with many different agencies and entities that work in wildfire mitigation and forest health and watershed health, and then also have the incredible opportunity to be a part of a national network called the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. And this network has, I've been a part of the network since 2015. And in the last 8 years, essentially I have these unique opportunities to learn from practitioners, from state leaders, federal partners, but basically from across the entire United States working in fire adaptation. So it's an incredible space to be able to learn. And when Courtney brought up that you all were thinking about putting forth a pre-fire playbook, I wanted to share this idea with this national network because I knew that they would have some great insights. And they were very excited about this as well, seeing that the success of the post-fire playbook has been great. What a great idea to put together a pre-fire playbook. First, I just want to share some Fire Adapted Communities network resources. So I'm going to share my screen just really quick. And then I'm going to just talk about a few specifics. And I'll drop these links in the chat in case you all have not been here before. So I first wanted to start with some incredible resources that are out there. And so I'm seeing incredible, there's some really informational images and graphics that are out there. And so one of them is called the Fire Adapted Communities graphic. And so this is out there, what was created by the network. And this is by network feedback through everyone in the network. So emergency managers, nonprofit organizations, water users. And so essentially this is a not all inclusive graphic of what the Fire Adapted Communities lens is. And so we've got in the blue, the blue donut on this represents sort of the main themes of being fire adapted and what way different types of areas to work through or work in to be able to move forward towards fire adaptation. And then the green is more the on the ground resources or programs that might be a part of that. And so I know the words are small, and so I will share this with you all, but this is just one place to start and kind of sit a little bit when you're really thinking about the big picture of pre-fire adaptation. Next,
hey, Allison, I just want to pause for a second for a quick check to make sure everyone can hear you. It's just a little muffled on my end, but I wanted to just check with the group and see if others are tracking, and maybe even if we just turned your camera off, we could see if that helps. But I can see your graphics, and I appreciate you sharing your resources.
I'm happy to turn off my camera.
Maybe that will help.
Okay, so can you hear me a little bit more, Amy?
I think so. It sounds like it's more of a microphone issue than bandwidth. So I think we can hear you pretty well. There's just a few times where it's a little muffled. So I think just making sure we can get your resources in the chat would be great too.
If it's okay, I'm gonna call in
Okay,
to the meeting, but then I'll continue. Let me just call in because this is really important.
perfect. Yeah, thanks, Allison.
I just want to make sure I'm not echoing. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think that's much better. I'm seeing some nods too. Yep,
Okay. So
wonderful.
I
Thank you,
just wanna-
Allison. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no problem. And thanks for letting me know. So the next resource I wanted to share is something that the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network dove even deeper. And they call this the FAC Pathways tool. And essentially they developed a tool to help communities identify sort of what type of community they are. Community is one of those big words in wildfire mitigation and fire adaptation, where to some a community is a group of homes, some a community is a municipality. Maybe it's a place that has a road easement or something like that. And so I will invite you all to head to this website and you can put your name down below, and then you can download this entire over 100-page toolkit. And it's a little overwhelming, so please don't feel like you have to see the entire thing. But in short, they also produced a video. They had a webinar on this as well to learn about some of these tools that are out there. And so I'll also share the Fire Adapted Communities YouTube page with you all and the specific FAC Pathways tool page. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a second. Does anybody have any questions just about these resources in general before I dive into a couple specifics about the document itself?
This is Clyde Church, La Plata County. I'd just like to say Fire Adapted Community Program is excellent, and we live in a fire adapted community.
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you for providing that. And this really, this resource and this network is always working to make sure that we are at the place we need to be at the time and ready to shift and change if needed. So I will share all these to you, Amy, and in the chat. But as I stop sharing, I wanted to just provide some wonderful feedback on what you all have so far. I had a brief call with Amy on Friday, and I just was really impressed in this idea of creating a resource, especially for our municipalities or communities out there that may not always get the money or may not be on the front page of the newspaper for all of their successes, might be more rural, may not be ready to start this or didn't know they had to start and be ready for wildfire. And so we're all at different stages of readiness. And I'm really, really impressed with how that is a big part of this pre-fire playbook. And one of the big things that I heard the feedback from the larger Fire Adapted Communities Network was that one of the ways to make this a success is to really narrow the audience to make sure that whoever does get a hold of this, it is in the lens and the degree of what this type of entity would be needing. And so we have a lot of landowner resources out there. I think you all are mostly aware of them, like Firewise USA or our Colorado State Forest Service new campaign, Live Wildfire Ready. And also the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network has some, resources as well. And so narrowing the scope to ensure that maybe this isn't a private landowner publication might be a good thing, so we don't steer landowners to a place that might be even more confusing. So that was one main feedback, was maybe keep that at the community municipality level. But if it gets too deep down into private lands, we've got a lot of great resources out there that we can send private landowners to for evacuation and, defensible space and all those other great things. The other thing was just to, and Amy, we didn't talk about this on Friday, but I just got a few more notes, is if you are putting together a document on the municipality level, more than likely, if a fire happens in a community, city workers or county workers might lose their homes. It's very unfortunate, but having contingencies in place for, how employees may deal with loss and home loss, of course, as well as other members in the community as well. But maybe having that as something that could be a part of discussion, or figuring out, hey, do we have a way to house our employees to come back to work, after the fire? Of course, and I see Christina on the screen thinking about municipal water infrastructure and water infrastructure in general. That is so important to know where that is and what the needs are, and make sure things are in place so that can be used or not damaged or destroyed to that extent. And then, the last was adding in maybe a community is at a stage of readiness that is right starting at the beginning, and maybe adding in ideas of, and this is a hard place for funding, but funding for a wildfire coordinator or a wildfire position in that community or in, city or county, but figuring out if they don't have that type of position, where would it fit in and how could that be a part of it? So anyways, I took a lot of your time, and those are our main feedback from not just me, but others across the country, and really excited to see this move forward. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know.
Thanks, Allison. Any questions for Allison or immediate pieces of feedback?
Just a comment. A lot of our small, medium towns have fire departments, but they're not preparing for a wildfire to blow through town. And that is an area where we might be a little vulnerable. And I like the idea of focusing this towards towns, municipalities, to help give them their emergency operations center, maybe some planning. Sometimes EOCs are separate from fire districts, and connecting the two maybe a little closer with a guide that gives them a structure to talk back and forth and relate closer.
That's a good point, Clyde. And we do have a lot of smaller fire departments out there that may not be ready to take this on.
Go ahead, Christina.
I think the point about making this more tailored for communities is actually really insightful. That's really helpful, because you're absolutely right, Allison, that there are a lot of resources for just like on the landowner level, and so it could be confusing. So I think defining that for more community level engagement as the audience, I think is really good. So thank you for that. I also just want to bring up too that when it comes to, and maybe get Allie's perspective on this, because the fire adapted communities, I mean, obviously like the connection is there, but I also don't want to step on the toes of the fire commission and, anything that they're doing for community planning. So just want to be mindful of that kind of crossover that I think recognizing that communities need like a forest resilience guidebook, but I also don't want to engage too much on the wildfire response structure, consideration side, being the Forest Health Council.
Thanks, Christina. I think those are really great points. And I had the same thought just talking to Allison on Friday about the fine tuning and narrowing the audience of, currently our audience statement is targeted at the local government and community level while being broadly applicable to a range of stakeholders from individual to multiple adjacent counties interested in advancing pre-fire planning and building forest health resiliency. And I think there's potentially a small tweak we could make rather than saying it's broadly applicable to broadly understandable to a multitude of audiences while still being targeted at the community and municipal and local government level. So there might be a small tweak to try and narrow in and fine tune that scope while still doing some of the plain language reviews that we can get into of wanting this to be as understandable as possible to a lot of audiences without delving into the a lot of the campaigns that exist from the individual homeowner perspective.
I guess, Allison, thanks for the feedback. I'm curious, did you share the Word document rough draft, like the whole thing with this national network, or just the goal statements, the purpose, goal, and audience? Or I'm curious what you shared, because they're all varying levels of detail.
Yeah, at the time I got this feedback, what was shared with me was from one of your original meetings with before I saw the document. But we shared common themes and ideas, and that was essentially where people thought a pre-fire playbook essentially would rest. So they haven't seen the draft document that was sent to me last week for the first time, but I'm happy to also share anything more with them if that's okay.
I think right now I'd recommend not sharing the whole document. I think it's pretty drafty. I was curious.
Yeah, they haven't seen anything.
So you got a bunch of feedback. I was curious what the feedback was based on. And it was a purpose, goal, and audience statements. Is that understanding? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they haven't seen the actual document.
Okay. Yeah, I think what you said aligns with what we've been talking about, because the goal is for the pre-fire playbook to provide a starting point on how to access all these other resources. So we have no intentions to reinvent the wheel. It's just pointing people and laying out a framework. Like you said, there's all these webinars, there's like all this stuff. It's overwhelming amount of information. It's a framework for how do you go about accessing what information at what time as you're moving forward. So happy to link to the Fire Adapted Communities Network, but I hope that adds a little context of where we were thinking and how we were building this, is to do just what you said, is point people to things like Fire Adapted Communities Network stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest feedback and the main initial concern was to make sure that, just to have the audience appropriate, and whereas private landowners have a lot of resources out there, and maybe this is something that would be good for them, but they thought the power rested in a larger audience. Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Katie, go ahead.
Hi, I think Brett pretty much said similar to what I was gonna say. I was thinking, yeah, I think if all they read was kind of those initial statements, then I think we could adjust those, like what you suggested, Amy, just to make it a little bit more clear who it's geared toward. But then within the actual document, it's more about just laying out the framework and then we could definitely point to some of these landowner resources so that the communities know what they can rely on, but we're not going to be creating those resources for landowners. So that might have been a little repetitive, but that was what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Good points. Any other thoughts or questions for Allison? And then I can turn to just running through my quick list of some of the feedback we've received to date. And there's a few areas we might want to delve into as a group, but I'll pause for 1 second to make sure. Great. Well, thanks, Allison. Certainly feel free to stick around and listen to the rest of the discussion, but we appreciate just you keeping an eye on the connection with the Fire Adapted Network and offering some of those pieces of feedback as we continue to get this off the ground. So in the agenda, I tried to just very quickly bucket a few of the pieces of conversation that we've had as a team that we received at the Forest Health Council meeting, and other areas. And I am sure I'm missing or potentially not articulating these completely correctly. So I wanted to start just our discussion by listing some of the areas of feedback that we've talked about. And in terms of just sort of the development and administration bucket, starting there, we've had some discussion on making sure we're clear at the get-go of trying to define responsibilities for ownership and ongoing updates to make this, will still have to be a living document in some way. So those are certainly areas for ongoing discussion as we continue to make this recommendation and would ideally work iteratively with the Colorado State Forest Service or DNR on its development. Closely tied to that again is more discussion needed on where the document lives, whether it's connected to the post-fire playbook, whether it's separate, where it's housed. I think Katie had flagged for us last week that the post-fire playbook is housed on CDPHE's website. So how do we link to all of these efforts is an ongoing decision point. I mentioned too, just making sure that we encapsulate that the hope is to have an iterative process as this guide is potentially developed in partnership with the full Forest Health Council and also with the two agencies that we work closely in the Colorado State Forest Service and DNR. And then also wanting this plain language review. That was a great lesson learned from the post-fire playbook of trying to make this as understandable as possible for a whole suite of audiences and a whole suite of local governments and municipalities that are in just this vast continuum of stages of readiness. So I think that's just a point to not lose sight of. And then moving into just the purpose, more of the purpose and goal of the document. We've already had some good discussion on fine-tuning the audience, making sure we're really crystallized in our thinking there. And maybe there is a way that we can point to some existing landowner tools, but really not focus on that and focus on all of the other resources from more of a forest health and resilience perspective for local governments and communities. One topic that I think we can spend a little more time on is a few questions on, with this potential planning document, where the CWPP process fits into it. So I'm really curious to hear a little bit more from those on our committee that are really more experienced in this endeavor. I know that was a comment that was brought up at the full Forest Health Council that we touched on a little bit. And then of course, in terms of content, there's still lots of discussion to be had on how the document eventually is laid out, what exactly lives in it. We've had some good discussion on, again, this is a framework for pointing people to the right resources based on the stage of readiness that they're in, but trying to think through the contacts and programs that we include, being clear about what resource to use when is another great point that we've talked about a bit with this committee. So I want to pause there to make sure we're not missing some big discussion points that I don't think we necessarily need to solve before we move this recommendation forward, but are good to continue to flag and keep a running list of issues that we know we'll have to navigate. So Katie, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks. I think all of those were really good discussion points, and I just wanted to add one. I talked to Chaska Woiwaka last week, and she's the one who's kind of heading the stages of readiness framework. First, I do have a final draft that I can send to everyone, and she and I went through and highlighted like which sections are most important because it's 40 pages long, and we thought that was a little excessive maybe for this group. So I will send that over in our email. But the main comment that she had is the stages of readiness framework has been in progress for a long time now. And there's been a ton of research that's gone into it, and they've looked at a bunch of different collaborative groups, and it's really just has like a strong foundation. And so I showed her our draft so far and how we've kind of morphed the stages of readiness framework that CFRI has been working on with, I think, Christina, was it the Denver Water Adaptive Management Model that we've kind of
Yeah,
mixed with?
it was like kind of 3 phases: inventory, assessment, prioritization, and then implementation, and then like evaluation. I think are the 3 phases for our watershed planning framework. So it was kind of a combination of those.
Yeah, and so the major comment that Chaska had is just if we're gonna morph them, we need to make it clear that it is 2 different things that have been morphed, and we haven't actually researched that morphed version yet.
Sure, yeah.
And if we're gonna use the stages of readiness language and that framework, just to kind of make clear what's coming from that and what's not. And if we want to have it more directly tied to the stages of readiness, then we could do future research and work more directly with CFRI. So just kind of those clarifications, I think we don't need to figure out today, but moving forward, the content related to that is going to be important to look at in depth.
And if folks felt like I just took a stab at it, so like if folks just want to do like the stages of readiness and just go with that, totally fine and support that. But yeah, I appreciate and understand where Chaska's coming from, that like, yeah, they're different. They're 2 different things. So
cool.
Thanks,
Well,
Katie.
that's kind of the gist. Does anyone have any other questions about that? And Christina, we all super appreciate the work that you've done, and she was not like offended in any way, but she just wanted to make that clarification.
Yeah, that's important. And thanks, Katie. And I think I'm certainly curious to hear the thoughts from the group, but I think one of the strengths and uniqueness of how we're trying to approach this planning guide is by morphing some of these concepts together, which is easier said than done, I think, especially from the research perspective of those that are really diving into it. So certainly we could take a step back, like Christina said, maybe just focus on stages of readiness, or continue to try and meld some of these concepts and maybe being very clear at the outset of what this is trying to do at some kind of early stages of research here. So I'll pause, and I'm curious to hear if others have thoughts on that. And again, I don't think we necessarily need to decide on an immediate direction today. Brett, I'm guessing you have some thoughts, so I may just put you on the spot to hear.
I think I echo what you said, Amy, of sometimes people who are closest to a particular part of research are not the best to synthesize multiple kinds of research together. And I think that's something that this group can bring, is taking things like what Chaska has led and synthesizing it with other things. And we can be clear about what's what, but that's what we're trying to do, is leverage lots of resources out there, right? So I think that's a good path forward.
Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, and
Any-
Chaska was definitely supportive of us morphing, just making clear what's what. And then she also said she'd be happy to talk to us more if that's of interest. But I think there's definitely pros to putting multiple frameworks together too.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for sharing the final stages of readiness document, Katie, and very supportive of highlighting sections that some of us might want to pay closer attention to. So that's awesome. And thanks for doing that. Any other kind of pieces of feedback you've either heard in your networks or that we didn't capture on this running list that we can keep certainly adding to?
The only thing that's on my mind is wildfire ready watersheds. Was that on the list, like kind of a possible overlap, or how does it work with CWCB's wildfire ready watersheds?
Yeah, that's a good point, Christina, that I don't think I explicitly stated or called out, maybe in the connection loosely of where the document lives, but certainly also content-wise too. So thanks for flagging that. I am curious to spend a little bit of time on the CWPP question, especially from those that are much more involved in those processes or have experience with communities. I think that is a question that's come up in a few contexts of, you know, how does this fit in within the CWPP process? So I would really benefit from hearing how others are thinking of that concept.
I can start. We participate in a lot of CWPPs. So because we have staff that are like living in these communities and in the watershed, but then also, I mean, we try to think about our planning for our critical infrastructure. So we participate in a lot. I would say that there is a focus primarily with CWPPs on like evacuation routes, and forest treatments certainly are a component of CWPPs, but in my experience, it is more focused on values, like the values at risk, like certain structures, certain infrastructure, and power lines, and thinking about what are the values at risk, and then like what are the ways to get out of when there's a fire. I think that CWPPs also do have an education component and kind of bringing the community together, which is good. However, what I've seen is that when a CWPP is written and then it gets put on the shelf, they are more successful in having, if like Boulder County, like they have a wildfire coordinator, essentially like county coordinators that's their job, is to coordinate this effort. And so it seems like, I think the benefit to thinking about this resiliency guidebook is that it's helping build kind of like a collaborative effort that could be focus more on forest resiliency, which is a component of a CWPP, but I think it does help build kind of that collaborative support network that is needed regardless of whether a community has a CWPP or not.
I got to comment just a little bit. I think the CWPP is something where we need to play a role, or some state agency a role in facilitating homeowners associations. And Christina's right. Some of them are going to be just how to evacuate because they have small lots and they can't do any more mitigation than they have or won't, and are going to evacuate. Up to large HOAs who, like ours, well, we're not large, 100 home sites, we have 40 full-time residents. Our CWPP then is the basis for grant applications to both the feds and the state. So the CWPP is really important for the communities. The other part it can bring is capacity building. And capacity building, I mean, one of the first things we did is bought chainsaws and held safety classes for our members. We gave away the chainsaws. Well, they're still back in the shed because they need to be sharpened and filed and all the maintenance on it. So getting communities engaged and enthusiastic about fire mitigation, getting the understory out, links together with the CWPP. What's the vision of the community? I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but we've gone as far as we fund our own beer, brat, and beans, and I may have said this before, to build community spirit and bring out our volunteers. So we get 3,500 hours a year of volunteer work matching in-kind grants with money from also the HOA. So it's an enabling document, but it's also a esprit de corps building document with capacity complementing that. I'm done.
Hey, this is Diana Selby with the Colorado State Forest Service. I was gonna pretty much say some of the same things, so I agree with both of the comments from Christina and Clyde before. I think that we have to mention CWPPs and point people in the direction of here's resources and where that, you know, how communities can get started with that and sort of tie that into how it fits with this overall resilience planning, because it is a key component. And as Clyde mentioned, sometimes even required for various funding sources. If people are looking, if that's what their, you know, their stage of readiness is and they're looking for funding, then this is, you know, has to be in place, and a lot of communities are within that area already. So I do think it'll be a component, but again, kind of like we've talked about, as this group has talked about, I think it's, again, sort of saying, here's where all these resources are that you can find to help you get started and what you need to look for and minimum standards and all of those things that exist out there already.
I think so CWPPs are one planning process that could fit within this resiliency playbook. Also just point out not all CWPPs occur in areas where there are forests. So CWPPs are not just a forest thing, so they're bigger than that. And this playbook is specific to forest resilience, I think, on our Forest Council, right? So that our playbook will not be relevant to every single CWPP kind of thing. But yeah, I think back to the goal of what we're trying to do is to make processes like CWPP relevant and actionable so that, like Clyde and others have said, they don't sort of sit on the shelf and become just a planning document. And I think that's the key that we're trying to build. There are a bajillion resources out there on how to do a CWPP right now, right? Diana and other people, there's no shortage of people trying to do that. I think what we're trying to add is whether you're doing a CWPP or some other kind of process, here are some things where you can incorporate, like Christina said, Office of Emergency Management and evacuation considerations within a larger landscape and vice versa. And access the right information at the right sort of stage of your planning to make it impactful. So CWPs are one of several vehicles to do that, right?
That's helpful, Brett and Christina and Commissioner Church and Diana, all that chimed in there. I think that certainly helps frame out that discussion a little bit better. Angela, I'm wondering, just the last 15 minutes, I want to make sure we're prepared for the Forest Health Council meeting on July 27th. You know, we've teed this up for the Forest Health Council, and I think got a lot of head nods to keep moving forward on this and collect additional pieces of feedback. And the way we've structured, you know, we have our purpose, goal, and audience. We have a kind of skeleton of an outline. And we've talked about the ultimate recommendation would be that the Forest Health Council will create a detailed outline of the planning guide with a recommendation that DNR or the Colorado State Forest Service use existing resources or be appropriated funding to finalize the resource product in collaboration with the Forest Health Council. So I think there's a discussion of, do we have enough to put in the 2023 report to keep moving in this direction? And then how do we keep moving forward on adding more details to this outline in the meantime? So I don't want to put you on the spot, Angela, but I just want to make sure you feel like we've got enough for the recommendation conversation coming up, and then we can talk about as a group how we might, divvy up sections or have some homework assignments to add some more detail on the outline in the meantime.
Yeah, those are great questions. So I think it would be helpful. So I don't think you should stop any work on the outline in the meantime. I think perhaps we should set a deadline of, okay, so we have our next Forest Health Council meeting, July 27th. Basically, when we send out the meeting materials a week beforehand, I would really love to be able to, and it will probably be on the Friday because the legislative committee will have a meeting on that Friday, the 21st, and vote on their recommendations likely that day. But I think the plan would be to send out, to basically send out the recommendations from both committees on that day, on the 21st, to the full council so that they have about a week to review them. And I'll ask Courtney to chime in here if we've agreed on anything differently in the other committee meetings, because sometimes I have to miss them. But so I think that would sort of be your deadline, like basically shoot for having, any tweaks to that language that you already presented made. And then if you do have a more detailed outline, I think we should share that at the same time, just so the council has a better idea of what they're voting to approve. And then I think it's an open question as to whether we, include a detailed outline in the report itself. I don't think we necessarily have to, because at this point it's sort of an internal work product of the council. But we could have that conversation, if we feel like it would be useful for like legislators or staff in the gov's office to sort of see that, we could include it, but I think we could kind of go either way. Is that helpful? I feel like you asked something else as well.
No, I think that's helpful, Angela, because we've got some pretty clear language on our recommended action to include, so we can all take one last pass at that at our next meeting, July 10th, I think, to make sure there aren't any last language tweaks that we want to make. And then in the meantime, I think we can use our last, 10 minutes here to think about assigning some potential homework on getting a, second, more detailed version of the outline on some areas that I think we can further flesh out based on, some of our discussions to include with that pre-packet ahead of July 27th.
I think that would be great. And the only other thing I'll say is, I see James here is on the phone. James, if you're available or listening, I think Director McCombs has potentially mentioned, and Courtney might be able to clarify this too, has potentially mentioned that the State Forest Service may have some resources that they could put towards this to hire a contractor to flesh it out. And so I think the only other detail that might be helpful to clarify is whether the council does want to make a recommendation, for instance, to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee to appropriate additional funds for this, or whether there are already some funds available that could see this completed, and really it's an administrative request, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. He may have mentioned something to you in passing. That's something that I haven't heard yet. I'm happy to follow up and ask if there's any of those additional resources within CSFS's budget, though.
That would be great. And this is probably getting into the weeds too much, so we can talk about it offline. But if anyone, and maybe it's let me see here. Maybe it's Christina. If anyone has any knowledge of like how much the post-fire playbook costs to produce, that would be helpful information.
I don't know. I think I do think it was volunteer, like Matrix or not Matrix. SWCA consultants participated. I think of Brad Peel may have participated. There were consultants that participated. I believe it was just for free. I don't think anyone, I don't remember at least any of the utilities coming together and throwing money at it. Amy, do you know from Kate, from talking to Kate?
I can reach back out to Kate and see if she can provide us those details. My understanding was it was a lot of kind of in-kind voluntary efforts, which is great. I just think it would be better if we could get some resources appropriated to get this moving. And so right now we've kind of got the recommendation kind of open-ended for both scenarios, but you're right, Angela, if we truly need to appropriate money, those are flags that having the wildfire matters maybe keyed into. And then of course, would need to work through the budget processes for whichever agency might take this on. So James, that would be great if there's any kind of clarification you could get. And I know that's if there is any sort of existing funding. So awesome, thanks. In terms of just divvying up sections, this is always difficult, just trying to figure out how we pass the document around. If, one person, Christina, you did a ton of lifting to get this to the stage that it's in. There may be kind of a subgroup of folks that want to take another pass at this and add some details, or, there's a couple ways we could do this, trying to divvy up sections, one team lead. I'm open to just thoughts from the group on maybe if there's interest in taking another pass at adding details.
Yes, a question, just back to your conversation with Angela. There was a date that we had to have a recommendation, like end of July, right?
I think that would be, our meeting is July 27th, and sounds like, Angela, you want to have all the material sent out by July 21st. Is that right?
At the latest.
Yeah.
But
So
for
we
that
could-
recommendation, we just need the purpose, goal, and audience, basically. And sounds like from today, we can make some minor tweaks to those.
Yeah.
Just trying to think about how much work we want to, I want to keep going, but how much work we put into this before there is a dedicated person or people
Right.
work on it. And what that timeline looks like. Since you're going there, I mean, I'm happy to volunteer to put some effort into it, but that's where I don't know. I don't want to put a lot of effort into it before then why are we hiring someone to do it, kind of thing.
Right. I think what we haven't fleshed out is we've committed to providing a detailed outline, and how detailed is it? So are there pieces in this outline that maybe isn't fully encapsulating some of our intentions that we've talked about in this committee? So there might be a few sections that we add in terms of, like, an example, links to contacts and programs, just to really articulate, again, this is supposed to be a framework to point people, not reinventing or duplicating efforts. Maybe there's some of that language of clarifying that this is melding a lot of different research perspectives we can make clearer. So there's a few tweaks like that maybe we just ensure the intention of this group is captured in that document to set hopefully a future consultant up for success on at least picking up where we left off. But I think that's a great flag, Brett, of, we don't want to, we all only have so much time in our schedules, and we're probably not going to get this across the finish line to a state where it's ready for prime time by any means.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something, so just based on today's conversation, the feedback from Allison Lurch and other people, I think we do need some work to help clarify the outline and intent of it. The document would help. I wonder if that, yeah, this could go lots of directions. I don't know if we need an outline, or maybe it's just adding more detail. We have a purpose statement, and then we can summarize from the notes from all of our meetings of purpose, goal, and audience, like what we're hoping to accomplish with this document, right? To lay out really the purpose and need for a contractor to then put the content together. So something there.
Yeah, I think that would go a long way to just crystallizing some of our thinking of if we further flesh out sort of a summary. We wanted to have these clear, concise purpose, goal, and audience statements for more of the recommendation to the Forest Health Council. But there is probably some additions to the document, like you said, Brett, to further flesh out intent and structure and things like that.
Yeah, but we've already talked about it a lot, and I wonder if we can go through past meeting notes or other things to get us started too.
Yeah. Any other thoughts there on maybe what, little tweaks we might make to the outline in the meantime?
I can, Katie, if you're okay with it, I can work with Katie and maybe like trying to address some of the description about like, inventory assessment prioritization and the action plan and like the, implementation, like those phases essentially. Like I can put some language in there about where that came from. And then Katie, maybe I can work with you like on the side to make sure that that addresses some of Chaska's really good comments.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think, Brett, if you wanted to take kind of a first pass at some of the overarching summary language that pulling from a lot of our conversations, that would be great. And then Christina and Katie can add more on the perspectives of melding multiple research approaches. And then I'm happy to take sort of the last pass and just make sure some of these other flags of things that need to happen later on in the guidebook are captured in the outline, so we don't lose sight of just these other pieces of feedback that we're not going to solve at this stage, but are important flags for later on. If that sounds like at least a good starting point for now. Awesome. Okay, so next meeting we'll all take a close look at just our official language that we'll recommend, and then likely have just a slightly updated outline to share with the rest of the Forest Health Council well before, I think, the July 21st deadline that we're shooting for. And then, like I mentioned at the beginning, Amanda West Fordham with Colorado State Forest Service is able to join our next meeting July 10th to give a good update on the All Lands treatment database. That was another area of discussion and interest of this group. And sounds like the good news is that there's been a lot of progress there, and that some of that momentum is really moving in the right direction. So it may not need to be a formal committee recommendation to move forward on that. And maybe there's more of a pathway of providing feedback into that effort. But I think we can pick back up some of those conversations next month. All right, any other final thoughts? Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. Great to see you on a Monday, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Amy.
Yep, thanks.